Hello, this is Petar Peskarich again, and this particular time I'm doing a little bonus talk that's mainly going to be story-based. I have a few little things to show that came along with this, but this primarily is the story of how I recovered finally after about 25 years of searching the OkiGraph 1 EPROM set for an Okidata 82A printer. And it was just one of those things that down the road I ended up tossing when I was out of college because the power supply died in my printer and ended up regretting. So to start this particular convoluted quested story off, I'll go back to when I was 12 years old and purchased, my parents purchased a Apple II Plus. It came with 2 disk drives, a Okidata 82A printer, and what was supposed to be a Microtech Dumpling GX graphics card. Well, as things went along, that story totally changed. So one thing that as a kid would want to do back in the mid, like I say, mid 80s. So this would have been 1984 at that point. Was try to do something with print shop, try to use some other tools. Basically, nothing I tried worked. I was 12 years old at the time, just trying to figure things out and get things working. Nothing was working. Well, after playing around for about a month or so, I figured out what was part of the problem by looking on a few magazines found at the library because we lived out in the middle of rural nowhere in Ohio, on the eastern side there, and found out that my particular Okidata 82A printer, it was incapable of dot matrix, dot addressable printing functions. It was a text-only printer with the firmware it had. But Okidata had this $99 upgrade at the time, so where you could actually print bitmap graphics and for dot addressable anywhere on the page, which is what the print shop type applications, print, Graphics Magician, Font Tricks, all those the different printing utilities of the time were wanting, if you had an 82A specifically. All right, so convinced my parents that they needed to spend another $100 on a firmware upgrade for the printer. That particular project actually turned into a good deal for my parents because I got it cheaper, but one thing led to another, and I ended up actually calling Tokyo, and that was my first time with doing that back in the mid 80s, and it was a roundabout way. It didn't cost us anything because it all started off of a 1-800 number into Canton, Ohio, at Computerland, and ended up finding our way from Canton, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio to, so this time it was New York and then finally Tokyo, and actually found someone over there that actually understood what we were trying to do, and they said, yeah, we'll ship you one to the store for cost essentially, and that would be what we'd get. So a month later, we had a nice package from Tokyo show up in the Canton Computerland at the time for $39, which was OkiGraph 1. Ta-da! All right. So tore the printer apart and updated everything and ended up with a printer that still looked like stock, which was something very similar to this. So this one now has the new EPROMs that we located installed into it. But as a now almost 13-year-old, I finally had a printer that could print graphics. All right, so that was cool. So got the programs going again, and still basically nothing. So as it turns out, What also happened at the time when my parents bought the computer, the box that was supposed to have the Dumpling GX graphics card in it, the parallel printer card that's compatible with this printer, turned out to be the more brain dead, less graphics enabled RV611 um, graphics printer card. So I was still stuck. Well, another few months down the road, so now by about 8, 9 months after getting the machine, convinced the store owner that yeah, they messed up and they replaced out the card and they actually gave us a Dumpling GX card. So then I can actually start printing graphics. Yay! I had lots of fun with basically everything but Print Shop. And what the reason that is that basically any version of Print Shop only supports the Okidata 92 and 93 printers, which are one and two generations like newer than what the 82A is. And if you do try to use the built-in routines, what you get are basically extra bands of white dead space on each of the line feeds. It's not a full line feed, it's like a partial line feed. It's really kind of bizarre. And there's no amount of compression settings or line widths that you can do to actually set it on the printer before you had to fix it. So that was frustrating. But Garfield Cartoon Maker works awesome with it with the 82A. There's a driver for it with the OkiGraph 1 installed in it. Graphics Magician, the Penguin software titles. Font Tricks was very useful, and I used to make greeting cards with those two applications specifically. There was a version of Printmaster that also worked with it, and that was pretty good. And then some of the holiday greeting card applications that were out could actually support the printer and worked very well. So, all right, that got me to basically 1986, right before the 2GS was released, and we actually upgraded to a 2GS and got an ImageWriter 2 at that time, and that relegated that particular printer to not doing a whole lot for the remainder of its life, except I went to test it in probably 1997 at the time, I think it was, and found that the power supply died, and I decided to chuck the printer. Well, totally forgot that the OkiGraph EEPROM upgrade was in there. I figured, okay, no problem. Eventually, when I go to, replace it out to see if I could find some of my childhood later, I would find them no problem. Completely wrong. So, eventually spent from probably 1998 through 2020 Christmas time searching for these chips. And across the way, met several great people, found a bunch of different versions of EPROMs. Let's say over the last year, especially when everything started coming together. When I was out in California in 2015, I actually did find at the Mountain View, the computer museum out there, they actually do have the 82A OkiGraph 1 EPROMs there, but the combination between like Jason Elliott and Les Barrows and a couple other people that I knew out there, we just could not get our hands on those EPROMs to read. All right, so that was a dead end there. Searching eBay, nothing comes up except different other firmware pieces. And many of those were like $80, $90 a shot, so I never really bought them. Then this wonderful thing happened a couple years ago when it started. So Computer Reset in Dallas, and that was a treasure trove of almost every firmware known to man for Okidata that I was looking for. And a lot of them I ended up finding there one day. And the stash I'm kind of going to go through and show right now is only a small part of it. There is about 60 boxes of these things, and eventually I'll resell some of them or whatever here. But what they did have was this beautiful little box, which is actually how all those EEPROM upgrades shipped for these printers from Okidata. So this was the 82A firmware. I was ecstatic when I saw it. until I got home. So when I finally got home, checked everything out. Well, guess what? The Q5 chip was perfectly fine, looked good, read fine. It matched a couple other copies I found along the years. And I never did have a Q6 that worked. Pop Q6 in the reader. Q6 is completely blank. And it's so still stuck. In the process of that particular search, though, we ended up finding the IBM version for the 83A, which is the wide carriage printer version. We also found the OkiGraph 2, which is the software-based graphics handler. And the best way that I can describe this is that it's essentially just a 5¼ inch floppy with some screen dump routines that match essentially what's in every Grappler Plus, the Dumpling GX kind of stuff. It's just meant to supplement the dumb parallel printers of the time. So that's how they got around it later. They say it's compatible with the 82A, but it is not. You definitely need OkiGraph 1 to even use that software. We also found the plug-and-play version for the 82A, which gives it IBM block graphics capability, which basically is only usable and useful for, well, if you're plugged into a old IBM 5150, going way back the XTs, it gives you that block character set. We also have the IBM plug-and-play kit for the 93, so that is the wide carriage version of the 92. And then we also found, this is actually kind of cool, because it's the Apple plug-and-play kit, and not many of these were actually sold, but it is basically just a standard Apple II parallel card that is basically meant to go with the OkiGraph 2 software for it. There's not a whole lot of intelligence with that particular card, but it's something they bundled to get people printing. So that was all well and good. So found all that at Computer Reset. I was sort of happy, but still have not been able to fix my printer that I had. And the printer that I actually had, and I was trying to find these Okidata OkiGraph printers for, the Eproms for, it actually was shipped with something that turned out to also be kind of rare, and I didn't really know it at the time. And that was another EPROM upgrade set that's called PC Writer. And what it did was it upgraded the Okidata 82A printer to basically think it was a Epson MX80 with graphics, which was kind of cool, because with that, that's the only way I've ever been able to properly use that printer with Print Shop. And it does a great job as long as you throw the printer into compressed graphics mode before you actually start using Print Shop with it. So yeah, there's no other way to actually get that printer to work with it. All right, so that was basically 2019 was that time period. Well, going into COVID time 2020, I started talking with a couple more people. So then we got basically Garrett Meyer, who found a bunch more of the Okidata firmwares. So he filled in a lot of the gaps with the Okidata 92 series. So we now have stock firmware and the IBM plug-and-play firmware for it. He also found some of the 83 copies of the 83A wide carriage EPROMs for those. And he also has what appears to be an incomplete/partial read of the 83A OkiGraph 1, which is basically the only firmware we're missing from the entire Okidata set right now. So we're trying to work out a way to use my reader, which is the GQ 4x4, instead of their TL866A, to read these EPROMs, since my particular brand of reader seems to really like these 2716s and 2732s, even when they're marginal. So that's what we're currently working on, that part of it. So that was that. Then there was this other wonderful friend that I met, Josh Kaysen, who had an 82A as well. And he actually has the OkiGraph 1 Eproms in his printer too. Well, he pulled his Eproms, made copies of them, but he also had a TL866 EPROM burner reader as well. And almost just like, just weird fate, well, his copy of the chips were basically inconsistent as well, and there wasn't enough between any of the copies we had to actually piece together a working version. So we tried 4 different times and went through all different permutations, and basically we were just stuck still. So then probably that would have been about in Christmas of 2020 was when another gentleman found me in the Facebook group and made a mention that he had an Okidata 82A printer and was trying to basically get rid of it. But he said he had essentially what would have been the homebrewed copy of this chipset that allowed it to print graphics, which basically would have only been the Okidata 82A that he built way long ago when they were brand new out of the Homebrew Computer Club when he was out in California. So that was it was awesome. So his name was Eddie Barron, and thank you, Eddie, for that. As it turned out, we were able to work out a deal where he just basically sent me his entire back control board for the printer that had the firmware. It came in perfect order. Basically, immediately took his control board, put it in my printer just to see what would happen with Okidata 82As if they were, and also to see if it was functional. And lo and behold, it actually came up. It was the Okidata OkiGraph 1 EPROM sets, Q5 and Q6, and I was just ecstatic. So once I verified that those were working, took them out, put them in my EPROM readers, made master copies of the both EPROMs, and actually was able to basically call that quest complete finally after about 25 years of searching. And since then, basically it's just been on a hunt to grab any of the missing versions of the printers or their firmware. One of the other items I found at Computer Reset actually was the Okidata 80 printer, which was also the essentially a rebadging that Atari did for one of their printers. So that was kind of neat. So the progression was 80, 82A, 83A, 92, 93 for that particular series, and those were basically the old slower ones. There was an 84 in there that was like their turbo model for the series, but those are really hard to come by. The other thing I've been kind of collecting are the the tractor feeds that go on the printers. I now have this is the 82A narrow gauge one. I've also got a 93 wide gauge that would also fit on an 83 as well. And I also found 2 more 82A printers trying to find EPROMs. And so I've got a total of 3 82A printers now. I've also got a 93 from Computer Reset that I was able to find. But it has an international power supply on it via its transformers. So one day I will either buy a little power converter for it or change out the transformers and get those working. But that was the weird, wonderful quest that took forever just in order to basically print graphics on an old 82A printer that I used to have when I was a kid. So thank you for sticking around for story time, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.